really excited. It is time for another UFC Hot Takes video where I read some of your controversial, spicy opinions about the UFC and MMA, and I share my thoughts on them. So if you haven't seen the first one yet, I'll have it linked in the description box so you can watch that video next. And we're still not getting through all of these. Today, your response has been incredible. And as always, you can still share some hot takes in the comments of this video for a future video like this. I think the next hot takes will be about like fighters, some retired fighters, some active fighters, and if you're looking for inspiration about what opinions to share, I want to hear about your biggest what ifs. So in the last Hot Takes video, we talked a little bit about John Jones's potential. What if he had been a little less distracted? What kind of just superhuman fighter would he have become? And in response to that, Yusuf said in the comments, we should get a biggest what ifs of all time in the UFC. I miss Zabit. I also have some of your comments ready about, what if these two fighters faced off in their primes? I think fighter A or fighter B would have won. So I think that's the kind of direction that we'll take for the next Hot Takes video. The biggest what ifs in the UFC. But for today, I want to set specific fighters aside and talk about the current state of the UFC, its fan base, its format, its commentators. And in fact, I think I want to start with your hot takes about the commentator because after UFC 300, I need to have a little rant. The commentators for this event were John Anik, DC, and Joe Rogan. And these are people in a position of authority. And by authority, I mean they have an authoritative opinion, voice about what we're seeing. Their position, like as commentators, they're positioned as experts, obviously. And they're supposed to tell us factually what we're watching. And to have the entire commentary table at UFC 300 either tell us outright that the cut man had given Yan Xiaonan smelling salts or some other substance, and that no one at that table said, wait, let's not jump to that conclusion. When even I was watching at home, much less knowledgeable than them, and it was clear to me that the just trying to help with Shanan's airway is preposterous. I don't even know if I'm using that word correctly, but it is. I think it's super irresponsible. And thankfully, someone, I don't know, like in the control room or something, had them correct themselves in the second round, or during the second round. But oh boy, that made me lose any faith that I had left in the commentary table. Like I needed a moment myself to just open up my airway and take a deep breath. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at your hot takes about the commentators, and I think I'm just gonna read them all at once and then sort of address them. So Constantine said DC and Rogan. Is it just me or my stomach is going crazy today? I just had lunch. DC and Rogan are great commentators for their energy and passion, but they also are the most biased to the point it's almost funny. CC said, Joe Rogan is outdated as a commentator. Guys like Paul Felder are much better analysts to listen to while watching a fight. Rogan's voice is just iconic. And Leon said, Joe Rogan is more important to the UFC than Dana White is. And to that, Braun replied, I don't know about that. Without Dana, the UFC would have never existed in the first place. So let's talk about these. Bias, first of all. Bias by the commentators is just out of hand at this point, to the point where, and this has been going on for a while, it's nothing new, but they're not calling a fight accurately, because they'll almost give the benefit of the doubt to their friends or to fighters that they prefer, even when they're down bad, losing a fight. And I think a lot of us, now that we've been watching MMA for over 30 years, 17-ish in my case, we know better. So oftentimes the commentary becomes sort of useless to me. You know, we can call out what we're seeing before the commentary table does. And part of that is the antics, like certain combinations of commentators, of analysts, will get so sidetracked. And maybe those sidebars are interesting to some people. My hot take is that it's not to me. And CC, you called out Paul Felder as an example of a strong analyst, and obviously he knows what he's talking about. But when I think of Paul Felder, I think of, like, you have to be careful about who you pair him with. And I think, like, John Anik, for example, plays into that as well. And listen, I can't say this enough about the UFC. I completely understand that I am not the target audience. But all of this is to say that I don't mind a sidebar. a tangent when it's funny or interesting. Like, I'm not against a certain level of feeling like you're watching with friends, knowledgeable friends, right? Like I was saying, the sport has developed and the audience has developed to a point that we have a deep understanding of what's going on during a fight. And so I'm not against the concept of having like fun commentary that sort of adds to your experience. But what we get in practice, I tend to just find annoying and obnoxious. So yeah, what I just said might be the biggest hot take of the entire video. But I do think the modern commentary needs a little bit of work. As far as Rogan goes, I do agree that the UFC has outgrown him. We have retired fighters now who have been professional fighters who might be able to provide better analysis. I think the UFC, speaking of bias, I think they'll keep allergy season. I think they'll keep Joe Rogan on as long as, I think this is a forever thing to him. And obviously he has a huge following, so it doesn't really matter to the UFC. Like, favors for friends aside, the UFC doesn't care that he doesn't offer the best analysis because he's Joe Rogan. That name is as big as the UFC. Did that help a little bit? In terms of who has been more important historically between Dana and Rogan, I think I side with Leon in that Joe has had the bigger impact. Someone out there would have picked up the sport and championed it in the background like Dana did, because there was money to be made. So it might not have been called the UFC, but this promotion would have existed at this level no matter what, or no matter who was behind it. And we can't even really know how much Dana might have held back the promotion while he's been there. But I think that having someone on the front end who was so passionate about the sport, like Joe Rogan, was instrumental in bringing MMA to the mainstream. I mean, look at Power Slap. That shit's not going anywhere. For what it's worth, my dream team at the commentary table would be Laura Sanko. I think she's the least partial commentator that we have. I think she's incredibly balanced and grounded. She's a fantastic analyst, both in how she delivers her message and the details that she notices. Michael Bisping, I think he's responsible in his commentary. I think he's incredibly intelligent and insightful, and he sort of flows with the energy really well. And Daniel Cormier, despite what we've said before, I think his grappling analysis is very important to the team. And yeah, he's goofy and he brings the fun, he brings the energy. So Laura Sanko, Michael Bisping, and Daniel Cormier, I realize that leaves no one for the ad reads, but I don't care. Okay, yeah, I'm realizing now I'll have to split this video into two because I've been rambling. Alright, I know what we're gonna do. There's a couple more things I want to touch on in this video. So let's talk about the roster and weight classes. So Sith said, cards can get real boring these days. That's my hot take. Bloke said, absolute oversaturation of the roster, leading to so many boring, unnecessary fight night cards that are unbelievably mid. And Nomura said, we should appreciate Adesanya and Usman as being active champions in their reign, defending in their weight class. Now we have Leon and Dreykus wanting to go for double champ and being inactive. Jams also talked about this, but your comment went deeper into like inconsistency with the UFC, so I'll keep yours for another time, as well as some more format and fan base comments that I had set aside for this one. Right, before I give my take on these comments, during my UFC 5 gameplay, episode 2 coming this week, by the way, I mentioned I wanted to talk about the UFC's use of the Performance Institute and fighter development, and the very sort of short version of what I had to say was that, I thought the UFC was signing fighters prematurely, and instead of putting money in its current, all of its money in its current roster, which is too big, they should be putting money in fighter development and the growth of the sport outside of the promotion, on a grassroots level, sort of like we often see in Europe with soccer, for example. But I didn't see that happening necessarily because the UFC is very much about revenue now. It's very short-sighted about the sport. It doesn't really even care about the sport, but about its revenue. And it's not interested in investing in the long term or the sport for the sport's benefit. Now, since then, I've done some reading, and it looks like they've just opened their third PI just a few weeks ago in Mexico City. I'm so sorry about my stomach. And they said that it'll feature a full-time academy that will start with 20 athletes and grow to 25 athletes in year 3, which, considering the amount of money they have, I think is a very slow start, but we'll see where that leads. It's still a step in the direction that I wanted to see. Now, in response to your takes, I totally agree that the roster is too big. I don't know if that's that hot of a take, but you guys let me know in the comments if you disagree. But as you guys say, it makes the promotion way less exciting. Maybe we'll get to that. But it kind of, instead of trickling down, it kind of works its way to the top and makes everything from the bottom to the top less interesting, less exciting. Now, I went back 10, 15 years thinking that I'd see the titles being contested more often, and that was the reason that we used to care more, just as a general group. But turns out that no, it was a pretty similar pace, where like about twice a year we'd get a championship fight for each weight class. So I think it just comes back to the roster is bigger, so it's harder to get invested in the storyline, so to speak. And we went from having 20 UFC cards in 2009 to 46 in 2014, so over 5 years. And I just pulled these numbers randomly because it was 15 and 10 years ago, but over those 5 years, the amount of UFC events in a year more than doubled. And that frequency would be a wonderful thing if the roster was filled with exciting fighters, giving us exciting fights. But a lot of the fights we're seeing are basically looking like sparring sessions. So it might be like a chicken or the egg thing, where the UFC has to have a bigger roster because they want to put on an event almost every week because they get the broadcast revenue. But like, I don't think any of my friends watch the fight night cards because they find that they have better things to do on a Saturday night because the fights are boring and the stakes are low because the roster is so big. Thankfully, I don't have anything better to do on a Saturday, so I can talk from experience. And yeah, the weight class jumping with new champs is also annoying to me. I feel like it used to be when you got too old to make that weight, to cut down to that weight, then you jump up a weight class and go for that title. Now everyone just wants to be a simultaneous double champ. Like you guys say, belts become inactive, and it just doesn't have the same meaning anymore. And it slows down the weight classes when someone's off in another weight class trying to hold 2 belts. Personally, I'm much more interested in a fighter absolutely dominating a weight class for a long time. You know, your Anderson Silva, your GSP, your Mighty Mouse. I think that's much more of an accomplishment than being a double champ for 6-8 months and keeping us from seeing a weight class advancing. Amanda Nunes was truly able to do both, to dominate for a long time in 2 divisions simultaneously and be active in both divisions. Let me know if you can think of anyone else who accomplished that. Will some say John Jones? I'm not picturing the timeline, but anyway, guys, I think I'll leave it there for this video. The camera's about to run out of tape. I don't film on tape. There's plenty more I wanted to get to today that we didn't get a chance to, so don't forget to leave your hot takes in the comments. Let me know about your biggest what ifs. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're on the road to 25K, but otherwise, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you in the next video.